Welcome to Dark Celtic History.
On this week's Dark Celtic History Podcast, 6 ghost stories from the Celtic world. Beware the Ashray. Somewhat recently, in the year 2000, a marine biologist and his colleagues from a university in New England came to Scotland to take samples from Loch Ness and a few of the other lochs around the Highlands. They spent time in the Highland lochs that have some sort of monster or creature legend associated with them. And after a late day of getting lost in the Highlands of Scotland, the intrepid crew of scientists came across Loch Ascent. The blue deep waters were inviting, however, the cold gray stone of mountain backdrop was ominous. The loch has easy access, and the crew was able to gather their samples rather quickly. But as they were finishing up, an elderly gentleman walked by upon the simple one-track road only a few feet from the crew. He was very old, could barely walk without his cane, and had a grizzled, worn face. He looked over and cast a weary eye upon the crew, and I guess he overheard one of them say what a beautiful day it was, and that they wanted to take a swim. "Hor don lucher," the old man uttered in Gaelic as he stopped and returned his gaze. "Excuse me?" asked the young woman who was assisting the crew. The others chuckled and asked her to just leave him alone. But then suddenly the old man turned and advanced quickly upon the woman and her friends, faster than an old man should go. "Hor don lucher," the old man exclaimed as he stood within inches of the young woman's face, named Susan. So close his fettered breath made her nauseous. "Did he call you a whore?" said the man named Alan, leading the crew. "Go on, old man, get out of here. Shoot," he said. The old man just rolled his eyes, turned and walked away and never said another word. They watched as he walked into the horizon and disappeared from sight. The group of young Americans had a good laugh when the man was out of sight, then returned to their plans of a quick swim. "That was weird," they all said. "Yeah." Well, that was the conversation for the next few minutes until one of the others, a young student named Bruce, began screaming and splashing about. Furious to get out of the water, he knocked the young woman Susan over and into the water. Only moments later, she began screaming and hurrying out of the water herself. Not knowing what was going on, Alan came to their side, upon the shore by the van. "What happened?" he asked. "I saw a ghost. A body. Something. It came right at me and then was gone. Then at me again. It tugged and pushed until I got out of the water," Bruce explains. "I saw the same thing," Susan said, visibly shaken. Of course, the police was called, and when they showed up, they began taking their statements. However, they seemed more interested in the old man than the possible body in the loch. When the group told the policeman that what the old man had said, he stopped and called his partner over, who was a Gaelic speaker. After repeating the phrase, "Hor don lucher," the policeman seemed visibly shaken and afraid. When the group of Americans pressed for more information, they refused and said all could be explained back at the station. Once there, they all sat around the desk and was offered coffee, while the visibly shaken policeman pulled a bottle of single malt out of his desk. He didn't even bother with a glass. He just turned the bottle up and took a large swallow. Then the policeman explained. The Ashray, or Ashrish, is a water-loving creature which is completely translucent in appearance, sometimes mistaken for a sea ghost. The Ashrays are unable to live on land and can be only found underwater. They can be male or female and resemble humans in their late teens or early 20s. The best time to look for an Ashray is in the dead of night, for they are completely nocturnal. But you wouldn't want to look for one, for they feed on your life force unbeknownst to you. Before long, you're too weak to get out of the water, and then you drown. Without a life force or a soul, you become one of them, fated to haunt the still waters of the loch for all of eternity. He went on to explain that Hor don lucher means beware of the Ashray in Scottish Gaelic. The ghost of Robert de Montrose. Few places in the world can claim to have as many restless spirits as haunted St. Andrew's Cathedral. From medieval times, Scotland has celebrated the feast day of its patron saint, St. Andrew, on the 30th of November. According to legends, some of St. Andrew's bones were carried across the ocean by a Greek monk named Regulus. The little chapel built upon the cliff tops of Fife to house the saint's relics was later replaced by a grand cathedral. Now, until the Reformation, St. Andrew's Cathedral was the ecclesiastical capital of Scotland. St. Andrews became home to Scotland's oldest university and the home of golf. And what of this cathedral? Well, in 1559, a mob led by John Knox ransacked and destroyed the interior of the building. In the years that followed, the building rapidly fell into decline. After the living vacated the premises, it seems that Scotland's former spiritual capital became a gathering place for restless spirits. At haunted St. Andrew's Cathedral, you can meet all kinds of spirits, from friendly fires to apparitions with attitude. Now, adjacent to St. Andrew's Cathedral lies the remains of St. Andrew's Priory. In 1393, the priory was a kindly man named Robert de Montrose. Although he had a reputation of being a fair and responsible man with a generous heart, there were times he needed to discipline some of the monks under his care. One of these was a certain Thomas Platter. Now, he resented being reprimanded and began to plot his revenge. So it was that late one night he crept up upon Robert de Montrose as he trudged up the stairs after a hard day's work to his bedroom to retire to his bed for the evening. Suddenly, Platter lunged from the darkness and stabbed him. Shock enveloped him. Then, as Montrose lay dying, gasping for his last breath, he knew he needed to ensure Montrose was dead. So to ensure the murder, he threw him over the railing to his doom. His ghostly presence stayed relatively quiet until a few hundred years later during the 1940s and 50s. A visitor to Rule's Tower stumbled in the semi-darkness of the poorly lit narrow stairway. A man wearing a cassock came to his aid, offering his arm. The man promptly but politely declined the offer from the kindly monk afterwards. The cleric brushed past him in the narrow confines of the spiral staircase. Imagine the man's horror when he couldn't feel anything as the helpful monk squeezed past him, or that there were no monks present that day. Since then, there have been many sightings of Montrose falling over the railing of the stairs. He has even been seen falling from the cathedral's tower. The ghost of Robert de Montrose is not the only ghost, though, to walk the ruins of haunted St. Andrew's Cathedral. For there were sightings of ghosts from the other world when he was there, when he was alive. He had written in some of his writings that some of the spirits there were not so benevolent. As an eerie mist descends from the Cullen Peaks, and moonlight hauntingly ascends its peaks and valleys, the presence of the other world can be felt. The moorland and the water of the river Sleeken give off an atmosphere that is eerily in this breathtakingly beautiful spot on the haunted Isle of Skye. In fact, this area is so hauntingly atmospheric, you would be shocked if there wasn't a tale of haunting, some cryptic creature or witch doing the bidding of the devil himself. However, in this case, it's a haunted car. Sort of. Dr. Alan MacDonald of Portree recorded the first documented appearance of the 1934 Austin. He did it in 1941, and even though it had been seen plenty of times before that, he witnessed the Austin speeding along the then single-track road which runs between Broadford and Portree. Those who have seen the spectral car claim that they have been forced to pull over to allow the car to overtake them, whereupon it immediately vanishes. Now, according to local lore, the ghostly driver of the car was a local church minister who was involved in a fatal accident on a mysterious rain-soaked night. Now, he is reported to have left his church with a problem pressing him hard and making him question his faith. Now, the Highland and the Islands of Scotland are stereotypically known for their bitter clan feuds. One of the most infamous of these long-running wars was the conflict between the MacLeods and the MacDonalds. The feud lasted hundreds of years and only ended when the Scottish crown stepped in to forcibly end the conflict. So one might expect that there would be ghostly encounters in the haunted Isle of Skye. Now, this can be found at Hardacory. In 1395, a fierce battle between the MacLeods and MacDonalds took place in the quarry. Now, it lasted the entire day until not one MacLeod was left standing. The bodies were piled around the base of a huge rock topped by a rowan tree. The stone is still called the Bloody Stone. Now, this minister was investigating a report from a young couple who had hiked into the Collins and had a picnic unknowingly at the foot of the rowan tree. The young couple reported seeing a demonic presence that chased them from their moment of respite and sent them racing from the area in pure terror for their eternal souls. Probably because they had one thing on their mind that day, and they weren't married. Now, the minister, after going up to this site, returned in a hurry and was said to be acting like a different person. He was fraught with a problem and was at what those around him called a tether. As a result, he lost his mind, and while racing back up to the site to confront his demons in his 1934 Austin, he had an accident. Now, some say he was in a mental and physical battle with a demonic presence that he had brought back, and he fled the church in a hurry to distance the demon from his flock, always being the protector. Now, he battled the demon as he drove, succumbing to the evil one, or crashing to avoid such a terrible fate. Nobody knows. Now, he is said to appear to others as a warning to stay faithful in the Lord and safe upon the road, as even in the afterlife he still holds a deep responsibility to protect the good people of his flock.
The incident at Queen's University in Belfast. Queen's University is in the city of Belfast in the north of Ireland. Close to the university is Queen's Elm Village that provides accommodation for students. A tower block, now demolished, once stood in the village. It is the site of a story of a haunting that once terrorized a student residing in room 611 in the block 40 years ago. Now, it has been the subject of reports in the Belfast Telegraph and the BBC in Northern Ireland over recent days. Needless to say, around this time of year, around Halloween, you always see an increase in ghost stories and the paranormal. But this one seems to stick around all year long. The story involves an account given by a man named Ken, who is described as a respected geneticist, now in his 60s, has told how he and other students at Queen's University in Allenbrook Hall were haunted by a figure of pure evil over a 3-year period in the early 1980s. The evil in room 611 is described as an extraordinary experience of supernatural activity. He later became convinced of the experience when he learned that 3 former students of the room had died. Ken described seeing an apparition of a large black silhouette which gave you the feeling of dread and pure evil when in its presence. Even his friend and roommates told him of a similarly disturbing experience. Now, on another occasion, Ken says he was alone on the 6th floor of the halls one weekend when he heard loud footsteps approaching his door, and just stopped outside his door. After a short period, the door started to be violently kicked and banged. Ken opened the door thinking it was a joke and trying to see what was happening, but there was nobody there, and the corridor was empty. Both Ken and his roommates James also witnessed desk drawers opening by themselves, pages of books turned by an invisible hand, flying cutlery, and other incidents, as if the entity was looking for something. Now, although skeptical about ghosts, Ken cannot get over the fact that he saw one 40 years ago. Other students who had previously similar experiences are coming forward now that Ken has decided to tell a story. An incident that took place after Ken was attributed to clumsiness by the university, but now is regarded as pure poltergeist activity. A female student who had broken her arm and collarbone while running down a staircase now tells the rest of her story. She was too embarrassed to share at the time. Now, her roommate came into the room and saw her being molested by an invisible creature. She was being held down and could not move. It was only when others came to her aid that she was able to get free and make her escape. The roommate was astonished, especially as a cold mass traveled through her in pursuit of her roommate. The girl says that just as she reached the staircase, a force shoved her from behind and she went tumbling down. Students on the stairs below and from her room came rushing to her aid, and as she looked back up the stairs, she could see a black mass dissipate as her aid arrived. The girl left school that night with just the clothes on her back, an excellent student with nothing to lose. She went home and never returned. Her friends and family say she became very religious. The hostile spirits of Blair Street vaults. In Edinburgh's old vaults, some of the spirits that reside there are even scarier than the old legends of murderous grave robbers Burke and Hare storing their victims. These underground chambers were locally known as Blair Street vaults and thought to be the home of, several nasty ghosts. These spirits will not necessarily show themselves to you, but their faces sometimes show in photographs, and their presence is felt in a number of ways. The most harmless ghost is Jack. He's a joker who likes to tug at your pants and throw stones across the chamber, causing echoes and things like that, just giving you a fright. Another one is known as Mr. Boots. He's the source of the mysterious heavy footsteps that in some way can be heard in the empty vaults. However, they're both small potatoes compared to the Watcher, a truly frightening entity. According to Nicola Wright, who has worked as a tour guide in and around the vaults for over a decade, the Watcher is always lurking in the tunnels. Psychics have reported feelings of dread at its presence, so much so that it's caused more than one to lose consciousness and fall to the ground. It's usually content just watching visitors, but sometimes it starts pushing people and pulling their hair. It has even tried to push a young minister down a flight of steps. The Watcher is at its strongest in an area called the White Room, where even veteran vault dweller Nicola refuses to go. She says that the Watcher tries to stop people from entering it by shouting at them and pushing them. People who have stepped into the White Room, though, have returned with bruises, scratches, torn clothes, and feelings of, extreme nauseous or dread. I wouldn't want to go there. Actually, I kind of do. The Piper of Kinnaird Head. Now, lighthouses are isolated and scary places. Scottish castles are famously haunted. When you combine the two, you get Kinnaird Head. This beautiful lighthouse has been serving Scotland since 1787, and it was built on the remaining structure of a 15th century castle. Naturally, this means that Kinnaird Head has its very own ghost story. Now, it is said that the lord of the Kinnaird Castle, Sir Alexander Fraser, was very protective of his young daughter, Isabel. One day, when Sir Alexander was away on business, Isabel took in a young piper who was seeking shelter from a snowstorm. The two fell in love, but when Sir Alexander found out, he was so furious that he locked his daughter in the castle tower, and he dragged the poor piper into a cave below the castle and chained him up. Unfortunately, a ferocious storm broke out that night, lashing waves against the castle and the caves, and the poor love-struck piper, he drowned. Feeling bad the next day, Sir Alexander took his daughter to the cave so she could see her love, and so that he could, dispel any hopes of marriage between the two young lovers. However, when the door opened, they found the piper dead. Instantly, the heartbroken Isabel ran up into her tower and without hesitation threw herself out the window to her death. Today, the cave is known as the Piper's Cave. Legend has it that the young man's ghost can be heard playing for Isabel, whose spirit haunts the area whenever a storm is gathering, desperately searching for her lost love.